This is the Village of Lake Bluff's Finance Committee meeting on Monday, January 24th, 2022. Could you call the roll, please?
Member Ryder,
Present.
Member Rappin,
Here.
and Chair Enkelman.
Here. Okay, the first order of business on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from our last meeting on October 25th. It says 2021. Why is it that I didn't catch that until this very minute? Should be 22.
Not for the minutes.
Not for the minutes.
Oh, you know what? This is left over from my, I pulled out last year's. So that's why. That was last year's. Okay.
Motion to approve.
Do we have a second? You're muted.
Second.
All right. Any changes or comments?
None.
No.
Okay. Do we need to do a roll call for approval, Drew? Or just all in favor?
I'll do a roll call quickly. Member Rappin,
Aye.
Member Ryder,
Aye.
and Chair Enkelman.
Aye. Thank you. The next item of business is an opportunity to allow any visitors who would like to speak on something that is not on the agenda. The committee allocates 15 minutes to do so for any individuals who would like to address the committee on an item that is not listed on the agenda. Do we have anyone lined up virtually who would like to address the Finance Committee?
No, ma'am, no one virtually nor in the village boardroom.
Got it. Thank you. All right, on to our business discussion items. The first one is the review of our budget calendar, and the FY 23-24 biennial budget timetable was provided, and you know, we're halfway through that at this point. And Bettina, we talked earlier about, you know, this budget timetable with respect to prior years. We're kind of on a similar time frame, if not, you know, a few items may be a little bit accelerated, but we're on a similar timetable as prior years, correct?
Yes, we are.
Right. So looking at the budget timetable, the next Finance Committee meeting, we're going to be reviewing that multi-year capital equipment schedule again, and adding the comprehensive fee schedule, as well as looking at the water budget and the related rates. But today we're going to be focusing on just the general revenue assumptions, reviewing the operating budget, and then the multi-year capital. So are there any comments you want to add to that, Bettina, in terms of our timetable?
Not in terms of the timetable. I have a very short 6-slide overview if you want me to walk into that right away, or if you want to
that'd be great.
something else. Is that okay?
Great. Yeah.
Okay. Can everyone see the screen okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. As Barbara already went over the draft budget calendar, the only addition or comment that I'll make is there was a typo at the bottom, so that year should say 2022. That'll be updated. From an organizational standpoint, the budget is organized by funds. Just a quick overview for those of you that haven't been part of this before. The funds, which allow the allocation of resources, and not all activities of local government have the same financial objectives. So we're talking about the general fund budget and operating tonight, and capital. Capital being getting transfers from the general fund, so the two are kind of interrelated. And then the following meeting, as Chair Enkelman stated, we'll be reviewing water and revenues, expenses, and the rates associated with that. Special revenue funds include fire tax, IMRF, Social Security, and motor fuel, and 911. Police is related to the police pension, the actual budget for the police pension board, and the expenses related to annuitants And then our component unit, the library, which he provides the budget that will be incorporated into all the charts in the book as we get closer to adoption. Just a quick overview on the funds. And then moving right into the projected revenues, the village continues to balance available resources with the cost of providing appropriate services, and economically sensitive revenues are expected to remain flat or similar to that of FY20 and FY19. So this chart represents 2007 to 2022's estimated year end and the budgeted revenues for 23 and 24.
And I'll just add a comment on this one, which is,
Sure.
you can see that the requested the budgeted 2023 and 2024 are slightly down. And I think that really has to do with a conservative assumption on auto sales for the most part. Is that right, Bettina?
That is true. Auto sales represents about 65% of our sales tax return. And with the supply chain down, purchases may still remain high, but supplies are low. And then there's always the caveat of the new tax law that was just put into place that now fully taxes used automobile sales without a cap. So we could trend the same or upward, but conservatively, that's what was projected.
Makes sense to me.
That's really, unless anyone had any questions or comments other than that with regards to the projections.
Well, I just had a comment about the used car sales. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of a number is that? Because, I mean, most of our revenue comes from new, not used, but what might that be? What kind of a number?
Well, the data that we're provided, unless we seek out some personal data from a dealership, doesn't break down used car sales versus regular car sales, but trade-ins and allowances and repurchases of those trade-ins are now not capped anymore. It used to be only taxed up to $10,000, and now that tax is removed. So in essence, used cars are now taxed the same as new cars. So it could just level off the existing return and have it be similar, or it could actually increase a little bit if the used car, pool is increased. Kind of a wild card, but it's helpful.
Well, and it is interesting because that new car product isn't available. So used cars are actually selling when they're available.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Hey, Bettina, which category is the Metro parking lot in this chart?
So I just chose some of the larger revenues that we focus on. The Metro sales are not in this chart.
Okay.
We're just focused on the 4 categories that are the 5 categories that are on here. But Metro sales would fall into licenses and permits. No, I'm sorry. Is that true? I'll look it up when we get to the budget sheets. I'm sorry. It could be charges for services, but Metro permitting for the parking lot, we used to take in about $80,000 a year with annual permits and sales. And that's substantially down, I think, this year to about 12,000, and I estimated about 20 going forward.
Wow.
The commuter, there just isn't the commute. People are working from home.
Yeah, and I think it's smart to budget low, because even, if we're fortunate and COVID is lesser, there are a lot of people who have flexibility now to not have to go to the office.
Right.
Seems appropriate.
So this is just a summary. I collapsed the various categories of revenue just to give a quick overview. It was also provided in the budget sheets. And I really just wanted to show that, I guess, in essence. For as far as property tax is concerned, those were budgeted at 1.6% increase, and then 4.5 for the second year, that just being a partial rollover from the 1.6% from the year before that was budgeted, assuming that we have larger CPI in there. But of note, the general fund will still receive less of the property tax money than it has in years past, because, a larger portion is being allocated to pensions. And this is just a general fund balance snapshot that was provided also in the packet, but just to review it again. 2015 through 2021 are audited numbers. So these fund balance numbers are part of the management discussion and analysis that was in the audit. And then FY22 is projected year end based on current expenditures and based on budget, where we end up, assuming that all the expenditures and projects are completed in those years.
Bettina, would you, since you mentioned the
I'm going back.
the police pension,
Uh-huh.
would you mind just showing us, do you have something that shows how that trends over the next couple of years?
So I don't, primarily because it's actuarially driven, and now we have the additional monkey wrench of what will happen when funds are transferred, and that's actually beginning. I have a pension board meeting tomorrow, and the first tranche of expense of funding is due to move in March. So it depends on what happens with the state, and there's also some speculation that they'll roll out the funding year to 2050 instead of 2040. I know that IML's already put out some surveys, and there's some laws that are being discussed and to be voted on. So that would also change the funding requirement. It would ironically reduce it, but that's something that we can talk about when we get closer to that and it all works out. So I don't really have a great answer for you there. Typically, we don't see a large change in our pool as far as the employees are concerned. What affects it are changes to mortality rates, which tweak every year, and then obviously the year-end investments.
Yeah, I thought I'd seen a forecast that showed it going up fairly substantially.
So the numbers that I put in the budget,
Yeah.
I budgeted about $70,000 increase for each year, and that was just based off of prior years.
Okay.
It's,
Right. And
it's on
obviously
it's on page 37 of 43 of the packet, the PDF file.
right.
Yeah.
And that takes away from what would otherwise be in the general fund, right? Right. What goes
Yes.
up goes down.
Because we're taking the property tax revenue to cover that, and reducing the general fund allocation, because the increase to the property tax isn't enough to cover the increase to police pension.
And Chair Ankerman, I know I'm talking a lot, so I apologize for that. But
No, I love it. I love it. I love
do
it.
you want me to speak as we go, or do you want to kind of get through this presentation and then have?
No, that's fine. I'm almost done. It was just a short little snapshot. I think this actually is, oh no, there's one more slide, sorry. So budget highlights just to show general fund revenues versus expenses historically over the last few years. 23 and 24 are the budget, and 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22 are year-to-date actuals or actuals from the CAFR.
And can I just comment on this and a couple other things? So the yellow there, you see that the expenditures are exceeding revenues. That's purposely spending down capital dollars and to maintain our fund balances. So that's not an uneven approach to finances here. Again, it was purposeful. And I guess a couple things about this, just high level. It's a budget. This document, for those of you for this, first round of dealing with village budgets, they do and will get amended. So one thing we learned going through the economic downturn associated with COVID, we put together a budget, and then COVID hit, and we had to go back to the drawing board, and the board ultimately approved a budget plan that the fiscal revenues and expenditures got adjusted twice. And so that was last budget process. So we talk about sales tax dollars and looking into that crystal ball. We do reach out to our car dealerships, and they were some of the parties that helped us figure that, we were looking at FY19 revenue streams. I know it's kind of hard to believe when you look at the sales tax dollars for the last calendar year, we're all-time high. It's but that is lagging numbers, and but we're trying to use the best information we have to present these documents. So there's a couple other unique revenue streams that we can get to, but I just want to make sure we address them. And that is, there were some one-time revenues the village has received during this COVID experience: the ARPA dollars, the Build Illinois revenue bonds, and some other dollars that will get addressed at some point. But just want to put those out there that we check those boxes and talk about them. So.
And Bettina, would you mind going back to the last slide? Thanks. Sure. I just, and this is something, I had a chance to speak with Bettina and Drew earlier, but this is one of the things that caught my attention in particular is, the general fund balance, as it shows on, well, it doesn't show on the bottom, but we typically, while that line is 50%. So we like to have 50% of, is it 1 year's worth of expenses? Is that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so you over the past couple of years, including last year and then even this year, we're at fairly high levels. In COVID years, we didn't spend a lot. There wasn't as much capital. Sales tax came in higher than expected. And as I see that get down to 51.7%, my comment was, wow, that's cutting it a little bit close. What happens if something, big happens or there's an urgent need? We're below what our threshold is. And I think, what we're doing here is there's a couple of big items in there, which is the Green Bay Road Bridge, and then some rehab to some of the safety buildings. We're kind of placing our bets, and those are things that my understanding is are urgently needed. And Drew and Bettina kind of calmed me down a little bit and said, hey, listen, Steve, this is a stab. Things are dynamic. Not all capital projects move forward as planned. That Green Bay Road Bridge, probably we won't spend all the money. So it eased my concern about getting so close to that threshold. And I was okay with it.
And if I could speak to that a little bit, so, these higher percentages, especially in 21 and 22, in 20 and 21, they were planned. We froze interfund transfers, and interfund transfers are funding from the general fund to the vehicle replacement fund to fund future purchases of electronics, computers, vehicles, anything related to operations. And so those were frozen. So all those dollars that normally would have been transferred, and also capital fund transfers, sat in the general fund, and intentionally done so in the event that we needed to use them because revenues were down. And fortunately, revenues came in higher or at the same levels as we would have expected originally, and we still maintain the original dollars that weren't transferred. So the numbers are higher, and as you go out to 22, 23, and 24, we see the transfers pick up again, and some of them are larger, and intentionally so, to utilize in the capital fund and the replacement fund for purchases, that were not made in those other years. So it's a catch-up.
Great.
Thank you. And Steve, I appreciate all those questions because this is the first time through that cycle. And it's important that however you process the information, that you get the answers in that format. So I need you to ask those questions, and I appreciate you asking those questions.
Great. Thanks, Carmen.
And the other thing about the volatility in revenues is that when you look at, property taxes being a third of it, approximately, that's not volatile. That's pretty stable, right? So in terms of the revenues that we get in, that's going to be stable. And there will be some sales tax, and there will be user fees and things like that. And Bettina seems to really fully understand the volatility, looking at history in the past and being in communication with our sales tax generating businesses. So anyway, thank you, Bettina, for
You're welcome.
keeping your finger on that. And thank you for that budget, that overview of, general fund revenues and how it, feeds that balance. You had also created a number of schedules that kind of spoke to all of the components. And if you had the desire to kind of just go over the overall operating budget overview, I think that would be helpful.
And could I just start with that, Chair Income? Is that all right?
Yes.
So for the longest time, the village was doing single year budgets and a multi-year capital plan. And then over the years, the board and staff had a conversation and said, there was, after, I would say 2012 or so, there were very few operational changes made, and the budgets became very status quo. And the conversation was, we should spend more time focusing on capital or other issues if there's very little operational changes, and we can do so, and the board can spend time where they wanted to by doing multi-year budgets. And so we approached this with a 2-year plan, and the board has, my understanding, has been very receptive of it. They've enjoyed it. Staff likes it because, again, there's so little change. In fact, this year probably has more operational changes, and it's not great. There's no proposed added bodies or service changes per se. It's just kind of changing how we do some of our own operations. And that goes to some things we've talked about a long time ago with outsourcing of the multi-year tree trimming program and doing some other things out of house that we've kind of maybe have not hit our own internal goals by keeping it in-house and kind of supplementing those efforts. But generally, this is a status quo budget, and I think most of the conversations will land on the capital improvement program. So in the packet, there was information about some of the highlights that this year's two-year plan includes. And again, this gets amended over time as information comes in and priorities do change from time to time. One of the things that was not listed, that should have been listed there, there's been, the village has a comprehensive land use plan. Member Ryder is very familiar with this after serving her duty on the Plan Commission Zoning Board of Appeals. So it's the village's comprehensive land use plan and how do we want to be. It's our blueprint for land use. That document has not been updated substantively since 1997. There's been a handful of amendments over time. This budget does include $100,000 to hire a consultant to help us redo that plan. We've been trying to do it in fits and spurts over time with in-house staff, and there's just not enough capacity to do it and do it well or do it in a timely way. So this budget includes getting in some help to do that. That's in the professional services line item of our administration. And I guess one thing I would like to do is, since there was multiple questions by Finance Committee members about some of the unique aspects of the administration budget, Bettina, would you cover with the group some of the highlights dealing with some of those transfers in and out and some other services or expenses that are housed in admin?
The admin itself?
Yes.
Sure. I don't know how easy it is to see the screen, but might be a little helpful just to know what page I'm on page 15 of the packet that was provided in the administration department. So there was some question over the fluctuation in the salaries category for admin, and then the estimated projected year end versus budget versus prior year and actual, largely due to salary increases that have not occurred yet that will occur this fiscal year. So we'll see that number change. And the projected budget number is based off of the prior year number, and we always estimate a 3% increase. So that's what's driving that. The actual year to date will increase. As far as overall, the department total is 2.4 million versus the prior year budgeted 1.9, and that increase is really due to this $1 million transfer. And as when we started the capital fund, there was a $2 million transfer from the general fund to seed that fund for projects. And there were a few small transfers in between. This is to reinitiate those transfers to seed capital projects that are planned, that you'll see on the 15-year plan that was in the packet. And there's also another $500,000 transfer the following budget year. Just to add, the biennial process allows for a full review of the budget in FY24, and that's where we realign revenues and expenses and look at what actually happened in FY23. And a lot of the numbers, at least related to projects and special services and contracts, may get changed, but for the most part, operating is pretty predictable. So I don't know if that gives you a small overview of what some of the changes are, but that's really the gist of it. The other professional services line that Drew had mentioned sees that change related to the plan document that he was discussing with $100,000 cost involved. And the rest of that's really legal services that's bumped up with the year-end numbers. And that's pretty much, governmental services. That's related to the IGA with Lake Forest. So that's Croya and senior center charges that you see in that line.
Yeah, can I comment on that? A couple things. One, so the village has an intergovernmental agreement with Lake Forest. We have for decades. It does include the senior services and youth services through Croya and the Senior Resource Center down at Dickinson Hall. Croya is going to come and give an update to the board in the very near future. I'm going to say probably the next 45 days or so to let you all know what they're up to. The Senior Resources Commission has been talking about for a number of years, and Chair Inkeman knows about this, and I'm bringing this up because it's not in this budget, but they have had conversations with the village board about contributing to a new senior cottage project that would be built in Lake Forest, on the west side of Lake Forest, just west of Waukegan Road, really close to their fire station and the west train station. But they have existing cottages there, and they've been talking about adding units, and that village participating financially would grant the village access priority for Lake Bluff residents to those that qualify to use or to get access to those cottages. And that's one of the ways that the village board over time has talked about trying to achieve affordable senior housing, and knowing that it's very difficult to do that in Lake Bluff. One, we have a very small footprint, and two, mostly built out, and so it gets very difficult to achieve it cost effectively. And since the village has had such a long relationship with Lake Forest for a variety of services, and specifically senior services, this seemed to make a lot of sense. So I've been in communication with Lake Forest staff over this. The project is actually going through the Building Review Commission. There's the subdivision changes that will need to go. I'm waiting to get a call back on whether or not this will actually be coming in this budget period, this next 24 months. Ballpark, it could be nothing. It could be $500,000 investment, just trying to, it's something that the village would negotiate with where village residents would fall in terms of order and access to these cottages and potentially all the other existing cottages that Lake Forest operates for senior housing. So that's something that's, again, not in this current fiscal plan, but we'll know more soon about whether that, and potentially even before this budget gets adopted, if the board's going to have to tackle that question. But I just want to make that clear, because I think I made that same announcement 2 years ago. This budget does not include those dollars, but just want to make sure aware that's still floating out there.
Well, I remember those conversations and the presentations, and I understand that it's going through a new overall, approach. It's going to have a different location, a different size, a different scope, a different everything. So
Yes.
we have to kind of go through that process yet once again. But I'm very excited about the idea. I'm excited about accomplishing those goals of having something that's available for Lake Bluff residents in terms of senior housing, and something that would meet their physical needs and hopefully assist in financially making something like that possible. So I'm very excited about that, and I really look forward to hopefully hearing about it sooner than later. But that's not really being driven by us. I understand that.
I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but Drew, do you happen to know the definition of affordable? Is it some sort of low-income housing tax credit, or just something that's going to be fairly modest in price, but isn't going to be regulated?
I'll have to get you that exact data. I don't want to.
Okay. Cool.
Okay. Susan, did you have any questions regarding any of these budgets for the various areas, or?
I had a few questions earlier today, but they've been answered. So I don't, I am interested when the time comes to talk a little bit more about the capital planning for the out years, but none is to this point.
Okay, well, I think, Drew, unless I'm missing something, I think we might be getting there. There were lots of details that we can look at, but I don't want to get so distracted that we don't kind of get to the capital piece.
Okay, but
Drew, is this grant and block one in the capital discussion?
yes.
Okay.
Before we get there, just a couple of things, if I may, going back to that list of operational noteworthy items. I wanted to throw in there that mosquito abatement services, we threw in, after talking with the Mosquito Abatement District former officials and having conversations with their contractor, $40,000 to take over mosquito abatement services that, again, those were formerly provided for the village by an outside other taxing body, the Lake Bluff Mosquito Abatement District, which is, should be concluding its existence very soon. But we're planning to take over those services, and we'll have to do that and be prepared to do that really quickly. You'll see that in the shape of we're going to put together a request for proposals. There's not a lot of service providers in the marketplace, but we're going to send out an RFP and try to build our program very similar to what the Mosquito Abatement District ran. And this will be the first time that the village has provided these services probably ever. So that's new, but you will have a say in what that looks like. They have been provided in very different ways, very minimally to, just doing monitoring to monitoring and larvicide, which is throwing these pellets into stormwater basins and other standing bodies of water, to adulticide, which is the fumigation tactics, which have been done by helicopter, by vehicle, and in California, they do them by drone. There's all different ways to do it. And there's also biological methods. You can use certain types of species of fish that will eat mosquito eggs in open bodies of water. So there's all different ways to do it, but we're going to put together a program, again, that it's most similar to the Mosquito Abatement District, and kind of take it from there. And my guess is that the village will modify that over the years.
My question is, didn't we used to see on our property taxes a line that said mosquito abatement district, something like that?
You did, Lake Bluff Mosquito Abatement District. that-
Right, so then that line item's going away, but then that rate for that entity, which doesn't exist anymore, that just goes to zero and we absorb it through overall municipal.
So, yes, so the village, by law, the village will have the ability to increase its levy to pick up the services for our corporate limits. The county is looking to, the district had funds on hand at part of, when the dissolution will include the village receiving dollars. We don't know that exact dollar amount, but once we get them, we can plug them into the budget to help cover the expenses of doing this for some period of time. But we don't know exactly how big those numbers are going to be. But yes, to answer your question, the village will be able to increase its levy to cover those services if it so chooses when that comes around in December.
So, but I'm just trying to get to the complex formula of how it's calculated. It won't, so if their budget was, by levying the tax, they received that entity received $10,000, is that the way in which it's backed into that we would be able to increase the levy by that same annual budget, or how does that work?
Yes, it'd be proportional, yeah.
Okay. All right. I know it's not a significant dollar amount, but I just want to understand if we're just to absorb the full impact of that and, give and takes elsewhere, or if it can be added on to.
And that'll become
Thank you.
clearer when it's my understanding, it's still in the process of being dissolved, but it's somewhat imminent.
Okay.
And if there's no other questions on operations, then yeah, let's jump in on capital.
All right. And that you'll find in your, the biennial budget update, the last page, which I don't know online what that page number is.
It is page 36 of the PDF.
Thank you.
It's pretty small. Did you want me to share it or?
That'd be great. I mean, just so that we know we're on the right page.
Sure.
We've all, all the committee members and the board members received paper copies of this. And so I'm saying this just for the benefit of the public. So that's why we can see what's happening a little bit easier. But it is in the packet online. And if people are wanting to look at the packet online, page 37 and 43 is helpful.
The packet, the preliminary biennial budget and capital update memo had attached to it a capital fund expense summary, which showed a slide that we've shared with actually a modification to that slide, but the goal was the same, was to communicate to everyone that the village has certain investment goals in its capital assets, whether it be sanitary sewer systems, storm sewer, transportation systems, so the roads, sidewalks, et cetera, and the water infrastructure. The village has a certain goal investment amount, and over the 10-year plan here in front of you, you can see that we do pretty well in maintaining those investments. There's a couple exceptions. I think storm and sanitary sewer, the village is a little hit and miss, but primarily miss in storm, and a lot of that has to do with the absence of a dedicated revenue source, which there's that ongoing conversation about implementing some other new revenue stream, whether it be a stormwater utility fund or something else, but we're on track examining that still. You'll see more about that again, but I just want to remind folks of that as we dive into this capital.
That's the page I'm interested in, the one that's showing right now.
It's 15-year summary.
Yeah, it looks like it's 35, 36, 43 on the on the document, 36, I guess. If we go down to the very bottom of this this page, or maybe it's not the bottom, maybe where can we tell the actual amounts spent, not what moved between funds, but actual amounts spent each year?
So the actual numbers are on here in the gray.
That's them. So that isn't the money that moved from one place to another. That's actually what we spent on sidewalk replacement, 33,820. Okay.
And then the first green column, FY22 actual year to date, is the actual year to date as of January 19th.
So, and then down below, so that says total general fund and then total capital fund. So these are additional. The only difference between these sections, I guess, is where the money that we spent was housed, or what, which fund it was sitting in.
Right. So
all
the
of
first
these in
area,
that column.
the public works is capital projects are general fund projects. So that being 1 through 21. MFT is the MFT fund, where we alternate the road paving projects and based on those revenues received from the state. And then waterfront projects are from the water fund. And then the capital fund projects are those that sit in that actual capital fund.
What's the significance of those differences? Why would it matter whether something was budgeted or spent out of the capital fund projects or the public work capital projects? Does it?
So originally all the projects were in the general fund, and there wasn't a capital fund. And we chose to create a capital fund actually to seed larger projects like the Green Bay Road construction, so that when dollars were transferred, they could stay in anticipation of those larger expenses.
When was that?
2018.
So that's why we see 0 on the left-hand column down at the bottom. Okay.
Yep.
Bettina, you have that. We have a much longer look back on this if it's helpful, Member Ryder.
And not particularly. I was just trying to orient myself to those and look at trends. So what I was just trying to understand is total spend in FY18, 850,000 looks like, if you add those 3 funds together and so on.
Yeah, Bettina, can you bring up that other exhibit? I'm guessing
Sorry, Drew, which one are you referring to?
that multi-year look back where we have a trend analysis about capital investment over time, that line graph. We kind of, I think what Member Ryder's trying to do is look
It's
at the
very
trend.
small. Give me a minute. I will get it.
But it's about $1
You
million.
don't want me to add real time.
Well,
I appreciate that.
Well, no, we've provided this because it has the village's capacity to spend and invest on capital has grown over time. A lot of that has been attributed to land use decisions and I'll target, the idea that sales taxes are coming to the village and it creates the ability for the village to spend. The amount of discretionary monies that the village had to spend on capital on a regular basis was very limited for a very long time. And the village would go out and borrow and do a lump of water main projects, and they go out and borrow and do a lump of road projects. But now there's been the ability to continually invest in the systems, to have a blend of borrowing and pay-as-you-go. And I don't know if you guys can see this, but
Very small. I'm
Yeah,
sorry. I'd be happy to email it to you.
the
So
total, maybe,
that's back to 95. Okay, so we're going all the way back to 95, and then this is all funds or just general? It was all out of the general fund back then, or?
Yes, in 95, it would have all been general fund.
except for, there would have been a water fund.
Well,
Yeah.
I was gonna.
True,
just gonna-
yes,
I
there would
was
have been a
gonna
water,
point
you're
out
right.
The water fund and the water fuel.
And MFT if that was for the street rehab. So yeah, there would be still several funds and they're all
I
written
see.
into that date.
And the village would have special service areas from time to time, or other project funds that would have been, we would have borrowed that we likely would have created a separate fund for us too. But
So looking in 2002, for example, did that year require us to issue debt, or no? 3 million, or did we somehow save for that 3 million expenditure in 2002? How were we able to fund a big spend year, for example? Looking back at those.
I can't even read it, it's so small, I'm sorry.
For which year? I'm sorry, Susan.
I was just looking
2002.
at 2002 because it's a big year, and then 2003 is pretty big too. But
Well, there were
I'm just wondering, we
bonds
issued
that were
debt?
issued there were bonds that were issued that we just recently paid off last year.
and that was
So
that
I
time
could
frame.
I could look back and see, but I would assume that would, yes, the answer would be, I would assume that there were bonds issued for the work that was done. It looks like water distribution storage.
So that was the water tower.
Mhm.
I see. Okay. And it looks like possibly expand, and then village buildings 13 or 1.3 million in 2003.
That was probably Public Works built right after that.
Mhm.
And are we generally in those kinds of extraordinary expenditure years, are we able to get grants of any kind, or were those paid out of general tax revenues? I guess you said we issued debt, maybe. Bettina, I'm just trying to figure out how we, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is how we manage the ebbs and flows here. Right? We don't go out and collect a lot more taxes in 2001 in preparation for 2002, right? We have a steady tax rate that doesn't go over the PTEL formula each year, and plan for these things. But in a year that was so anomalous, would we have, I guess you said we went out and sold some bonds, but would we also have gotten some grant money as well, or paid for by the state, or do we know?
Historically, I don't know that, Drew.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
not
a long
aware of-
ways-
I'm
it's
not
a long
aware of
ways
any
back.
large.
Well, I'm
20
looking,
years ago.
is grant revenue not itemized on here, Bettina? I still can't see it as a revenue source.
Yeah, it is.
Which line item? So is it in that 2002 year, like, does it show it? Maybe you can highlight it.
Well, on this infrastructure spending chart, no.
Yeah.
This
you'd
is just
have to-
spending, right?
you'd
That's
have to
just
go
spending.
to, but grant revenue is not going to go back this far. in
That far.
the budget.
Okay. But I think the answer
Yeah.
to your question is, generally speaking, yes, the village has always sought grants, and we've done joint projects with other municipalities. Before I came here, the village was doing, I think they were using U.S. EPA dollars that was set aside for certain communities, and we were doing it jointly with Highland Park and Lake Forest, and we were lining sanitary sewers as a capital initiative, and we were doing it under a joint grant funding. So the answer is yes. The village has always sought grants with success sometimes and not so much. But I think generally the village has tried to find grants where grants were available.
Okay. Yeah, earlier we talked about just the ebb and flow of some of the projected spend, and I was interested to see the historical ebb and flow as well, to understand just how that hits in any one tax year, and our tax levy decisions, how they play out over the course of time
Yeah.
on the availability of funds in the general fund and to move to the capital funds.
And I guess there's another thing I would note is I think there's what's changed over time too in the last 10 plus years has been the operational approach to project management. The village had George Russell was the village's first village engineer we hired, and George was very capable and competent and did a lot of projects, but as a human, there's only so much capacity. And so that's what was done, and there was not a lot of projects that were out of house, so to speak, in terms of either design or project management oversight. The village over time has evolved to where we consistently and very commonly have additional engineers we hire contractually to provide design and project management oversight. And so we do more because we're spending more. So, we're doing things differently too. So there's kind of a capacity thing where we can do so much, and that's, I think, reflected in the years in the past. And also, again, this different approach allows us to do more because we have more to spend.
Thanks.
And maybe one other thing, and maybe you recall this, remember, Ryder, but there's a time the village's standard for public improvements has evolved over time. Before I got here, I was told that, Lake Bluff wasn't too far from a cowboy town. I mean, there was no curb and gutter along East Center Avenue. It was a little less refined in terms of public improvements, and that has evolved pretty rapidly. And so the expectation levels for residents has grown. And so the quality and level of improvements are greater. And so that's, again, a bigger investment.
Right. Understood.
Barbara, do you want me to run through my questions, or how would you like to handle this?
Well, looking at the 15-year summary, that to me it would be something for us to just do in terms of just, looking down the left-hand column, seeing the different groupings, the descriptions, and then seeing where that falls in the projected years. I mean, some of these are obviously items that you'll see year after year, the things that we do repeatedly, like our sidewalk replacement. And, occasionally, the streets are kind of done on a cyclical basis as well, in terms of the funding coming from either the general fund or the motor fuel tax dollars. And so just kind of walking through this and seeing the pace of when these projects get done, you see that there's, in the capital fund area, you're going to see some of the bigger things like the Green Bay Road and it's not necessarily assigned to a specific project necessarily, but there's storm sewer work that's done every other year. So if you have any questions relating to the timing and the nature of the projects, this would be a good time to look at that.
I do have some questions and comments.
Okay.
So I'm going to start in Public Works Capital number 3. This is a large line item. This is just for street rehab. Drew, we had a presentation recently, and it said, hey, if you want to maintain your streets at a certain level, it's going to cost you this. If you want to double down. This has us maintaining, correct? Kind of the plan that was recommended at that meeting?
Yes.
Well,
And is it
this is number 3 is path repaving, right? Is that what you're talking about, or the
I
number?
used to-
No, you're right. 2 is path. Sorry, 3. Yep, street rehab.
There's two number twos only because there's the gap in the sidewalk. That's new sidewalk. The sidewalk replacement is existing panels that we replace for risk management purposes and just, maintaining them. The gap is we've identified all over town, there's places where you'll be walking and all of a sudden there's no more sidewalk. And hard to explain why, but that's where there's areas like that. And we've looked to prioritize some of these areas working with the school district as part of their walk to school program to try to find where the best gaps to go after to close. We've talked about a gap on East Sheridan Place. You may recall that from a subdivision improvement not too long ago. That's one of the ones we've talked about, but you see 115,000. I think we've programmed this to be a grant funded activity as well, 80-20. So, but the idea is that we wanted to put on that's one of the things we've always talked about over the years at the finance committee and the village board level is we got to keep track of everything. And so this is part of new. And so this is a new initiative, but it's starting in the out years. Don't have to spend a lot of time on it. I just want to make sure everybody saw that. So.
Drew, what's the difference between street rehab, non-MFT and MFT? Yeah, I know that's ignorant, but.
No, it's not. It's street rehab and it's just where the funding's coming from. So MFT fund versus general fund. We keep coming back to fund accounting questions, but.
Okay,
Right.
got it.
Yeah.
But again, that is to maintain, I'm assuming that everything in here relative to street rehab is what we saw in the presentation and said we were going to do.
Yes. And the difference is MFT has additional, when you use MFT dollars, you have to do procedurally and administratively things a little different using IDOT, and it's a little clunkier. So we try to couple that and do that every other year.
So the number 4 CBD streetscape for 1.1 million in 2024, that is block 1. And in the revenues, there is $950,000 in, I believe, grant money. And I think what you and Bettina told me earlier is we should have a sense in April, May timing, whether that 950 comes to fruition or not.
Yes.
And certainly if it comes to fruition, we should take advantage of that and put a little bit of our own money, I mean, in my opinion, and that's up to the board, but in the event that it doesn't occur, my opinion is that and maybe we could talk about this in a board meeting at some point, is that project should continue because we've kind of got challenges on block 1 right now with the tent because of all of the feedback that we got from residents about outdoor dining, because of the type of community we want to have. In the event that we don't get that grant, is there a watered down version improvement that is less expensive? And is there a funding source that we could identify? Because I would love to see that come together. And a bigger discussion for the board at some point, but would it be realistic to put a plan like that together?
It can be done, and we've talked about this internally, and I had Jeff looking at this, and we can certainly knock off a few $100,000 off the price tag, but it's still going to be, in that $800,000 range, at least first blush from Jeff. But the answer is yes, we can continue to look at these numbers and see if there's other ways to re-engineer this and try to come out with a plan to find dollars to have a plan B for block 1 should the grant funding not come through, which again, managing expectations, I don't have high hopes that it'll come in. So we can certainly go down that path and start looking at that. Just off the cuff, there are, what the village has done over the last few years with our contributions to the equipment replacement fund and contingency funds, you can start finding other dollars. And like we've already talked about, some of these expenses just don't happen in the time that we plan sometimes due to others, specifically IDOT. And so there could be, yes is the short answer. We can try to find a way to find a fund, a plan B.
Okay, and that's really a strategic board discussion. This is a finance, and what I'm seeing here is 1.1 budgeted, 950 assumed coming in a grant, and if that grant doesn't come in, then we'll have a bigger discussion about do we still want to find a way to do this.
Drew, could I
okay.
chime in for just a second? I'm sorry, I'm not on video, but I can be. It's Kate. this is a board discussion, but I actually have to say that given the fact that producer price index was 9% in December, which is raw materials, which we would be paying for, your number might be conservative. Consumer price index in December was 7%. And we are watching the Fed closely. They're going to do 4 interest rate hikes. And if they don't do it right, we're going to be in a recession. So while I appreciate everybody's attitude towards the central business district, looking at this budget, I think if the grant money, and I've said this, so this isn't the first time, doesn't come through, this is just not something we can move forward with. I had a Bettina question about the police pension, given the fact that the S&P 500 has dropped 10% since January 1st. So I'm just wondering, we don't have a money tree, so I'm not trying to be flip. I just don't think that the plan B is to find the money without adjusting assumptions for inflation and potential downturn. When we have so many things we have to do, block one just doesn't seem to be one of them. So I'm surprised to hear anybody say that, to be honest. It's kind of shocking, really. Given the current financial circumstances in the United States, I'm surprised by that. So I just had to say that. Sorry.
Barbara, why don't I let somebody else, I've got a list of other ones, but why don't I let somebody else roll?
Susan, did you have any questions that you wanted to interject?
Yeah, I'm still trying to get used to these reports, I'm afraid. Where is it that we see the 900,000 revenue, and how do we see that it's tied to this project? I just want to make sure that we align the spend to the revenue, if possible.
So there isn't a direct tie. I mean, there's a revenue line in the general fund that reflects that number, and the expense is just sitting here.
I
mean,
see.
There isn't like a revenue line specific to that project, but general fund revenue does show grants.
When you get
Grant
to that
revenue
page,
of
there,
975.
I see, there it is. Okay.
What page number is that?
12 of 43. It looks. I see it there. Okay.
Okay.
So when is it that we would know about this grant? Did you say May timeframe of this year or?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I hear what Kate's saying, and I would be reluctant to go through with anything along this order of magnitude if we were not getting a grant without knowing more. And I guess I'd be interested in understanding the contingency plans more fully. So I guess I'd like to, rather than create a contingency plan at this point, perhaps can we suggest that we move forward with attempting to get the grant and address the issue of what else might be done if and only if we get to that point? Or must we grapple with this contingency plan B or C, in advance of the May 2022 decision we're hoping to get?
May I just say this and tell me if this is right, Bettina?
Mhm.
So we have applied for this grant, and we don't know quite yet if we will get it. And if we get it, it may be that we find out in May of 2022. And at this point in the budgeting process, we are optimistically putting in both sides of the equation in terms of both the revenue and the expense. And should that grant not come through, then we would look at this project again, and we would say, is the scope of this the scope that we would like to address? And also, just as with the Block 2 project, it coincided with street work that needed to be done at that time. We may say that let's more closely look at when other street work needs to be done and bring the project in line time-wise with when that is being done. So you can change the timing, you can change the scope, and yes, the pricing will change. We don't have something that is an actual price from a vendor with, you know, the final drawings or whatever. We all understand that CPI is projected to be high, but what we're doing is we're trying to just put some numbers to what might happen as best as we see it. And when it actually comes through and we get an actual bid and we see what the numbers, you know, are, then we can make a better decision. I mean,
Mhm.
I think what we're doing with this process is saying we have an active application out there for a grant. We've talked about what something might look like. It's not a final plan. It's not an approved set of drawings for, you know, to actually get an RFQ, but it's a starting point. And we needed, the timing of that was driven by the availability of these funds potentially. And so that's why we did what we did. But everything can change. Every single element of it can change based on the grant, based on the timing of other projects, based on other road work that's going to be done. So I guess what we want to do is feel a little bit more comfortable with, wow, we see it in this budget. Here it is in this line item. That means it's going to happen, right? No, that it means that we're doing our best to prepare for something that at this point might happen. And if that funding doesn't come through, it's going to look different. The timing would be different. It may be not at all.
That's true. And this biennial process does bring forth the entire budget again next year, and that being FY24, where all lines are reviewed, capital and operating, and there are adjustments made. So FY24 is really a planning purpose at this point in general.
Right. Right. And so you're right. Given that this is a 2-year process and the budgets for the departments are more static, those operational type things, it gives us a chance. The biggest levers that we have at that point would be all this big capital. You know, do we do it? Do we do it at all? Do we just move it out? Are we needing to move it out because we don't have IDOT approval or whatever else, you know, needs to happen? That's what happens in that next year as well. So does that, for Susan and Steve, does that help give you a little bit of, you know, more comfort level for why those numbers are here and what we're actually saying by putting those numbers there, what we're actually saying yes to? Does that make sense?
It does, Barbara, absolutely.
And if it would be helpful, Jeff, could you explain to the board that section of pavement, if you recall, I think I do, the PMI number assigned to that block 1, as well as the condition of the sidewalk, because as you mentioned earlier, Chair Anchorman, that it is very probable that we will have to do improvements in that area very soon regardless, and if you can couple it, maybe it makes more sense because you're already investing there, not unlike what happened at block 2.
Yeah, I think it was in serious condition, if I remember correctly. It's probably a PCI of 26 to 28, somewhere in that range.
And for
the sidewalks.
Jeff, sorry, just so everybody knows, in that neighborhood of a ranking, those are the roads that we are looking at to resurface this immediate upcoming fiscal year, in the 20s. So please continue. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess that pavement is within probably 2-3 years of the end of its life. So if it comes to May and we do not get the grant, we have to make some sort of, some sort of decision to be made on what we're going to be doing, so we can either start patching the road to try to nurse it along for a couple more years, or just plan on redoing it the following year. The sidewalks are also cracked pretty heavily, kind of at the building line of the block 1 buildings. It settled a little bit and cracked, and that is that different textured sidewalk, so it's hard to replace in our regular program. So that is also, you know, something that needs attention, but it's hard just to do little pieces because they're giant panels and they're not traditional sidewalk. They're made to look old. So it's hard to get a match on that. So I guess some direction in May would be very good, so we can plan, you know, the smaller items if we have to on that block.
Thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate that. And Joy, it looks like you'd like to chime in here.
Yeah, I just had a quick question about some of the smaller things that are on this list. Like, I know we're always looking at the big dollar items, but there's a couple things on here that have been on here for several years. One of them, the Green Bay, West Washington pedestrian crossing, and the other one, the underpass handrails underneath the viaduct, in the viaduct. And I know they're not like big major things, although I do feel like the Green Bay, West Washington pedestrian crossing is. I know that we also are impeded because we're waiting for IDOT permits, or we're waiting for Metra, or the railroad, to kind of move forward as well. Do we have any other recourse, especially that crossing across Green Bay Road? Is there any other way that we can move that project forward? I feel like it's been on this list for years, and we keep getting close to doing it, then we can't get permitting. And that's really kind of a significant safety issue, that crosswalk. So I guess I'm just wondering from Drew and Jeff, if there's any other way that we can try and move some of these smaller projects that are more safety oriented forward without just waiting indefinitely for the state to try and get their act together.
The Ped Crossing Project, I think this was the first year that we actually budgeted for it. I know it was discussed prior. That is currently at IDOT awaiting their permit, yes or no. As of, I think we mailed it in December. So that design work is done, and we will probably hear from them sometime in February. And if they give the thumbs up, we will immediately put it out to bids. I don't know if it will be done exactly by May 1st this fiscal year based on that timing, but that should be done at least over the summer before the fall, if they will let us do it. I haven't got any indication from them on that yet. They're looking, but they are reviewing it now.
So if we don't get the permit on that, Jeff, then it looks like in fiscal year 23 and 24 that just goes away and there's nothing. I mean, are we then just kicking it down the road? Because I don't see it anywhere else. Is the assumption that it'll get done this year?
Yes, and if it doesn't, we would roll it forward.
Okay. Thanks. And then the same thing with the handrails, the underpass handrails. I mean, those are like crumbling and falling apart. And I know we have a little bit budgeted this year, but then it looks like in fiscal 28, we have 350,000 budgeted. So can you guys just explain that a little bit? I know I know handrails are not very exciting. Like, I understand.
The handrail project, we have been looking at it for a couple of years. I've had trouble finding vendors that are interested in that project. So we're going to put something out to bid this winter to try to repair the worst sections, I think, are under the Sheridan Road Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
The 350 is kind of for a more complete replacement, as more of that rusts out and needs to be replaced. That's just a lot of welding, and welding companies are not used to working in IDOT right away. So it's hard to find a company who does that kind of work and is used to working with the state. So we're going to keep trying to do that, but that's kind of been the challenge there. So I know the Pigeons have done a number on the section under the bridge. Other pieces are just kind of a few cases have rusted out, but that's the main issue of immediate, is to try to get the area underneath the bridge that have the severe rust and deterioration, and then in the future probably replace the whole thing.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Is that the type of project that if we were grouped with other municipalities that may have something, I mean, sort of similar? I mean, the city of Chicago must have a jillion projects like that, or that think of all the underpasses in Evanston with the railroads and whatever. I mean, can we network with other municipalities in terms of either grouping our projects or at least getting vendor sources?
Yeah, and I've looked. I haven't looked as far as Chicago. That might be worth looking into. It's almost all labor, and it's almost all welding, and that has been the issue. A lot of projects, there are, bids in this area on the North Shore that we can jump on. I have not seen anything like this. We talked about maybe just replacing sections, but that section that's out there is probably taller than it needs to be, but it is, it's what's there. So do we just replace pieces of what's there, or wholesale the whole thing out and replace it and, pay for that cost right now? And I think the approach we've kind of landed on was trying to keep it as is and just replace the worst sections for now. But I will keep looking. Like I said, that is a good question about if you get into larger cities, if there are similar projects going on. I'll have to look into that.
Right.
And
it would seem, yeah.
I was just going to say, Barbara, for those other members on the board that are new to Finance Committee or this initiative that I think Chair Inkerman's referring to is there's the Municipal Partnering Initiative. MPI is a joint procurement group that the village has participated in over the years, and it covers professional services from accounting to road resurfacing, sidewalks, fire hydrant painting. We've jumped on these joint procurements and taken advantage of good pricing. And with similar communities that have similar expectations and construction standards. Something as specific as this handrail, like Jeff says, I mean, that's such a unique thing that probably would not be part of one of those groupings efforts. And it's probably going to be solved by some local provider of those services figuring out that they're really ready to tackle on IDOT permitting process with the village, helping them or holding their hands probably. But the MPI program, one of the things that we've learned when we put that group together actually several years ago was that the biggest advantage is that if you're doing things with geographically close communities like Lake Forest and Highland Park, and we used to bid our road resurfacing with Highland Park, but we learned quickly that that drove up our costs because the asphalt plants had to drive further, and we were starting to pay a premium for the additional time, so we dumped them as a partner for that particular activity.
Oh dear.
Yeah, but they understood. So, but anyway, but that's that's kind of like the live and learn with some of these joint procurements. But it's certainly something that we do when it makes sense and bring it to you all and recommend it.
Right. Well, even if we can't do it though on a joint basis, I mean, even the city of Chicago, you would think that there might be a vendor who, if they've got a hole in their schedule, we're a pretty small piece compared to some of these larger things that they do. And so sometimes, we can just be that perfect puzzle piece that fills a need that they have. And, if we work toward that goal, eventually there may be a time that's a good fit. So that was my point. And you guys already know how to do your job a lot better than I could ever say. So one other question, Joy, did you have any other items from you're on mute.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, great. And I guess I'd like to ask Kate as well, if you had any other, if you're still there, Kate, I can't really see everybody.
Yeah, but no, Barbara, I'm here. I did want to jump on what Joy said, because I really do agree with her specifically about Green Bay and Washington, the West Washington. Its proximity to the school, I think, makes it curious why we haven't gotten permission. But since we live over here, I think like a lot of people that live on the North Terrace, we walk to the pool and the golf course a lot, and that intersection is so dangerous. So I would say that while Joy's right, these aren't like shiny objects, but they're so important. I mean, we have little kids on bicycles. I just think this should take a priority, and I'm disappointed that this would just get kicked down the road. I mean, if I had to choose, I'd choose this over Block 1 in a heartbeat, because we're talking about our kids. I just don't think that's a question. And I'm not going to get down in the weeds. I know you don't want to talk about it, but I would say that I hope that we're going to find the money to do that if we get permission to do it, and just keep beating that drum with IDOT if that's who we need to get permission from. Because I don't know if we've called who we need to call. Do we need a petition? Because it just seems like that it should be a priority. Otherwise, no, I didn't see anything on here that I thought was that stood out to me. I appreciate the understanding. And I also wanted to say to Susan, I'm grateful for your questions about the differentiation between the funds and kind of clarifying that, because it should be noted that there are a bunch of us here who've never done this before. So I'm glad you asked those questions, because they help all of us understand what all of this means. So thanks.
Great, thanks.
And Steve, I'd like to circle back to you. Perhaps some of your questions have been answered with some of these other comments, but if you had additional
I'll kind of give a last comment on my end, and then maybe ask Jeff a question. But I think Joy's right. Some of the big things get the attention, and it is good to hear the passion about the rails and the safety for the kids. But from my perspective, there's a lot of large spend for street maintenance, and we're executing the plan that we said we would. It just happens to be an annual large number. The stormwater, which is something we've talked about quite a bit, that is a long-term plan. And we have a consulting number in here. They put a big wild number in here in fiscal year 30, which is probably an 80-20. That would be our 20% of trying to get to a big fix for the trunk. So that's being addressed. It looks like in the immediate future, there's some big capital going into fixing the Green Bay Road Bridge, which my understanding is absolutely mandatory. It's the most efficient way. Now, if we wait, it's going to be a whole lot more expensive later on, and we're only paying 20% for it. So even though it's $1.5 million from us, it's got to be done. But that is, a big chunk. And then public safety work is about $800,000, and that also is work that needs to be done. So my question for Jeff would be, Jeff, looking at 22, 23, and 24, does this address, the urgent things that you need, or is there anything left off?
I think it addresses the urgent things. Urgency changes year by year. If we get a big flood, then usually people are more apt to try to push more money into stormwater. It kind of depends on, what happens. We've had a flood of water main breaks lately, but I can't say it's enough to say that we should, upend the whole plan and try to throw a bunch more money at water main at this point. That Green Bay, that $1.5 million, I think the bridge is about $500,000. The road itself is the other $1 million. We didn't make the round of funding we applied for 2 years ago. Our application goes in, the window opens again at the end of January to March. So we will find out probably in May or June, kind of like the Block 1 grant, if we are approved for 80% funding on the road recon. We already have approval on the bridge for funding. It's just the street. We're trying to marry the two so we don't inconvenience people for too many consecutive years. So it is a little lighter in capital, I think, as far as construction goes the next couple of years, as we're planning bigger things for the out years and depending on that Block 1 goes. But I don't see anything of an urgent need. Going back to the Ped Crossing, if IDOT says no, then we can certainly try to go up the ladder on that. We just haven't gotten to that point yet. So hopefully they will say yes, and we can get that out to bid and installed before the fall school starts. But I think everything in here is kind of like, we've been refining how we do this over the past several years with Drew and Bettina, and we're trying to make it a more consistent approach. There's always going to be spikes in capital just because we're so small that one decent sized project's going to skew the graph for that year. But I think that we have a good approach here just to keep chugging along and trying to keep things maintained and improved. And then, the shinier objects kind of come as I think funding allows.
And speaking of not shiny objects, just looking at the sanitary sewer section of the capital budget, 17 through 21, it's not something that, people know about, like what is the life of the lift station and where do we have the weakest points in our system and that type of thing. Specifically, when you look at this, you see that the Lakeland lift station has had some, issues over the years. And I just, in terms of, do we just approach this at a level of, what's failing or about to fail, or what's the big picture on the sanitary section? Because I just have no idea.
So we've invested in Lakeland, Forest Cove, Wimbledon, and Tangley Oaks lift stations, and I think West Center as well. So we have put quite a bit of money into that. We had a lot of issues, a lot of those like Lakeland, Forest Cove, Wimbledon, they all serve a very small population. So it is, it's kind of hard to throw that much money at something that serves 9 homes, but it is absolutely necessary for it to work. We've been trying to standardize how they work and their controls, which has been big. They all had analog and, very old, outdated control systems. So now it's easier for our guys to operate. We're getting a lot less false alarms. There's nothing like, say, in the Lakeland lift station that breaks that, our guys can come out and they can do it manually until, something gets fixed. That was, adding a bunch of overtime and a bunch of operational expense that we didn't need to do annually. So I think we've kind of gotten over the hump on the lift stations. Now you see the 300,000 every other year in the out years. That's more for manholes and sewer lining. So we should be good, 10 years maybe on lift stations. The next one is actually Lansdowne is having quite a bit of troubles, which is Unfortunate because it's not that old, but it is having some issues. That's probably the next major thing that we'll need to do. Yeah, I think the sand sewer program is probably been the most consistent or the highest spent over the past few years. And I think we have improved the system quite a bit to help out public works and keeping, sewage out of people's basements.
Maybe I'm not looking at this right, but when I look at the out years, meaning something,
Mhm.
I didn't see the 300. I just saw alternating 20 and 25,000 in the
Line
budget.
33 in the capital, line 33 is sanitary sewer improvements.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Got it.
And the 20 is kind of the planning the year before we spend the 300 the following year. So they're staggered.
Got it. So that's like the engineering piece of it. Okay.
Mhm.
Got it. Thank you.
I have-
Fantastic.
I have a question for Jeff. So you said that Lakeland, the pumping station, the lift station was not that old, but it had issues. Did you isolate what the issues so that we don't repeat that in the village as we try to modernize our infrastructure?
So Lakeland was old. It's Lansdowne. That's not that
Lansdowne,
old. The whole
sorry.
Lansdowne subdivision is only like 15 years old. And I think it's the control issue more than anything else. That it sends off a lot of false alarms. And it just, I think sometimes when maybe it was installed, paid for by developer, it wasn't necessarily the highest quality installation. So I think maybe we haven't quite gotten the use out of that we probably expected when that subdivision was built. But it is still operable. I just think that will come up sometime in the next 5 to 10 years. That we'll have to put some more money into that to try to standardize it as well.
Thank you.
Well, I think we've had a great discussion regarding the capital improvement budget, and I don't want to, this is not our last look at it. This is, a first good look at it, and hopefully the next time we look at it, we'll start to recognize, some of these and see the patterns and be able to, ask some more good questions. But are you looking for direction as far as, the discussion that we've had, Drew, or are you, is this more just, a discussion for informational purposes so that, as we go through the process further in the budget timetable, we will be able to, approve?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking for, we wanted to check boxes, and actually, tonight, there's 2 more that I want to make sure we check, actually
Okay.
3. But we wanted to give you, this is your first look at it, and not hearing a lot of heartburn, which is great. A lot of work went into this. So, and like we started the meeting, we're about a month ahead of schedule. This is good. But really quickly, the first thing I wanted to do was just to clarify for Trustee Briand, to be crystal clear, the Green Bay Road Ped Crossing signal is going to be just like the one you see at Sheridan Road, right by Block 1 from the train station. It will be a solar panel, you push to engage it, flashing strobe, that'll be there when the crossing guards aren't there. It is in for permit at IDOT. It is funded in this fiscal year, and if for whatever reason, if IDOT refuses to issue a permit or whatever, we will certainly fly that up the flagpole with our state representatives and do what we can to try to secure that. I will say, from time to time, IDOT has changed their standards. When that one on Sheridan Road was put in, had we gone, I don't know if it was a year earlier, Jeff, or a year after, we wouldn't have gotten the permit because their standards changed. But just not allowing that type of traffic control device as part of their infrastructure in their rights of way. But I'm hopeful that we'll be successful very soon, and I'm hopeful that we can make this happen within this fiscal year. But again, if it doesn't happen for some strange reason, those monies will be rolled over into this budget so that it gets done and paid for in the next fiscal year. The second thing I wanted to make sure everybody knew is where the ARPA dollars are presently and how they're programmed, so everybody sees that and understands that. And then same with the Build Illinois revenue bonds. These are one-time revenues the villagers received. Can you cover that, Bettina, please?
Sure. The Build Illinois fund dollars, the one-time revenues are in the capital project list under MFT because the state has requested or required us to track it as you would MFT dollars, although they are not MFT dollars. And those funds are slated to be expended in FY24 along with the street rehab project. So they'll be utilized for road work. That's where that sits. As far as ARPA funding is concerned, the most recent Treasury guidance and the final guidance from Treasury has changed the spending requirements. And insofar as we have, how do I explain this? So there's a stipend that you can utilize for revenue replacement instead of calculating revenue losses or applying the grant monies to a specific project. If you choose to use the stipend, there's a $10 million allowance. And basically the funds received can just be absorbed by the general fund as long as they are not tracked to debt payments or pension fund payments. So basically that's saying that you can take the ARPA money, and if you meet the $10 million stipend, which we obviously do at $786,000, and it is just put in operating in the general fund to replace operating expenses from that period of time. So it can be used for any of the projects or replacing operational costs.
Thank you,
in the general
Bettina.
fund.
That was 2 of 3, Drew.
What was the third one? I'm sorry.
The third one is, I just wanted to be
Oh.
sure, what?
Are you going to talk about the target?
Well, you can
Revenue?
talk about that. Go ahead real quick. If that's
Okay.
okay with everybody. It's
So
not,
just for point of information,
yeah.
we have a sales tax agreement with Target that rebates them approximately $250,000. There's a formula behind that per year, and that ends in FY26. So we're looking at having that sunset, and that will then become new revenue, as we'll be able to keep the entire sales tax amount.
Thank you. That's significant for those out years.
Right.
Yeah, and this the last thing I'd like to mention is just to remind folks that this budget does, I don't think anybody asked about it per se, but there is item number in the capital plan, stormwater dollars. Looking at number 34, the storm sewer trunk. Just to clarify, there is $60,000 in the upcoming, the most immediate fiscal year. That is our share of the phase 1 study for the trunk line system. And then the other improvement I wanted to point out and make sure everybody saw was line 27, the lead service line replacement. That's one that we've identified. It's a water fund activity that we've talked about internally. Just practically speaking, this would, we've talked about internally. I think we had a very brief conversation at maybe that was just Chair Ankerman and I, but we were talking about what is the most efficient way to do this. This fiscal plan assumes the village is going to end up paying for most of those service replacements over a period of years, as opposed to doing them all in 1 year. And Jeff, could you talk about that, why that's probably more practical?
We have about 120 services we'll have to replace, and they're all individual. It's all a meeting with, the homeowner and trying to figure out where to do it in their basement. If we choose to pay for that and contract all that work, it's just going to be, that's probably too much to handle in 1 year. Breaking it up in about 20-person chunks, I think is more reasonable. As well as we do have, I think, until the year 2042 to get rid of them all. So that should be an issue given the way it's in the budget if we choose to go ahead on that plan.
And Drew, is this one of those types of activities that would benefit from outsourcing that more, like outsourcing that construction administration and planning?
Yes, not unlike the water meters. We hired plumbers to come in and do that, and that was a very efficient way to achieve that, and that's likely what would happen.
Got it. Okay. All right, so I think we've gone through our business discussion items A through D, and we're now to this informational report, unless I'm missing something, Drew.
No, ma'am.
Okay, informational report regarding the auditing contract with Sikich. And Bettina, you want to share?
Sure. So I know in prior meetings, I talked about an RFP with community, joint RFP to seek out new auditing firm because we've had Sikich for such a long time. Multiple communities expressed interest. They've slowly all fallen off and decided to maintain contracts with their existing auditors, looking for extensions. Primarily, most of those other communities have done that because of ARPA money and because of CARES Act money and other funding sources that would require us all to have single audits because we will exceed the $750,000 limit. So a single audit is just like a whole nother audit process, creates its own document and reviews then, once you hit that limit, reviews every grant or every grant dollar that has been received by the village, and you have to do a lot of substantiation and show the expenditures and the invoicings, and there's a process behind it. So it would end up being more than just the ARPA money. They'd look at everything all the way down to little click it or ticket money that we may have received, or whatever federal dollars that we've received, as long as we meet that $750,000 threshold. So that being said, I talked to Dan Berg, who is partner at Sikich, and asked him to give me information on if we were to continue with the firm for a term. And he gave me some information, first saying that he has kind of stepped back and is looking towards retirement, but not quite yet. And Martha, who was the audit supervisor that I've dealt with for the last 4 years, is now partner. So she's assumed a different role, and we would have an entirely different audit team that she would then supervise or look to for partner review, and he would kind of be in the background if there were any questions. So that being said, we'd essentially have a whole new group of people, but there would be some familiarity with our process, which would be a good thing, especially in a year where we're taking on a single audit. So I asked him for pricing. He came back and said the first year he would not increase pricing at all, so the pricing would remain the same. That being the $38,975 for village audit and library. That includes the library audit, which is a separate process. And then each year thereafter, there'd be a 3% increase. So informational, looking for direction to bring to the board.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot that's new in terms of this ARPA funding and other requirements that they're constantly changing. It's kind of like, what are the guidelines for COVID? You know, it's a moving target, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, after discussing this briefly with you and being familiar with how painful those added requirements can be for an audit and for just providing at a whole new level detailed, you know, spreadsheets and explanations and support. I think that it sounds like that adding the stress of somebody who's new to the village, new to our processes, would be particularly burdensome and perhaps not recommended at this time, not helpful. And so, you know, if any other Finance Committee members have thoughts, please chime in.
I don't have any thoughts.
All right, well, I think then it's my feeling that in order to provide the best, you know, support for our staff and the best use of our dollars in terms of, you know, staff having a team that is familiar with the village, it would make sense to stay with Sikich. And their pricing seems reasonable, given that they froze that first year, and then their increases in 23 and 24 were at 3%, which is reasonable given the predicted levels of increase in CPI. So I'm pleased to say, let's just stick with signage.
Hey, Barbara, I'm going to backtrack. And I may have missed this. Is this a 3-year commitment or a 1-year commitment? Given that it's a new team, if we don't
It's a
like
3-year
what's happening,
It's a 3.
it's a 3-year commitment.
Mhm.
And it would be, Bettina, it would be significantly more expensive to have a 1-year commitment, or they just wouldn't do it.
He would not engage for a 1-year commitment.
Okay, and the cost is, the 38,000 is just a few percent higher than 21?
So the 38,000 is actually the same cost. There's no cost increase for the first year.
Yeah.
And the 2 outlier years are the increase, it's about $1,200.
And you've appreciated working with Sackage along the way?
I have.
Okay, I'm good with it.
So unless I hear something from Susan, we've got some direction that is a reasonable.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
It'd be great if there was a motion to recommend to the village board.
I'd like to make a motion to the village board that we continue with a 3-year commitment to Sackage for our audits.
I second.
3 roll call.
Sure. Member Ryder,
Aye.
Member Rappin,
Aye, that was silly.
and Chair Ankerman.
Aye.
It's necessary
Well,
evil.
Yes,
So-
necessary evil. So at this point in time, I think we've gone through our agenda. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Before we make a motion to adjourn, I would like to thank Bettina in particular for somebody who read this in great detail for the first time. It is outstanding reporting, award-winning reporting. It really goes back in time, but I am very grateful, and I feel like this exercise has made me really understand the finances of the village, and kudos to Bettina, and of course, Drew, you've weighed in heavily, and the rest of the team as well, so thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks.
And a motion, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Roll call? Or do we just all
All-
in favor?
Yes, ma'am.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right. All right. All right. All right. All right.